Have you ever stopped to think that somewhere there might have been a cold, calculating killer capable of taking multiple lives, spreading fear throughout an entire city, and yet never being found? Imagine someone who killed repeatedly, left a trail of terror in their wake, and to this day remains a nameless, faceless shadow, a ghost lost among police files and the victim's memories. What you're about to discover may surprise you and perhaps even disturb you. This isn't just another famous case you've heard about in documentaries or true crime series. Rather, we're talking about a little-known serial killer, someone who acts as an enigma in criminal history, a criminal who has never been caught and whose identity remains a complete mystery. While names like Jack the Ripper and Ted Bundy have gained worldwide notoriety, this case remains virtually forgotten, hidden among the yellowed pages of old newspapers and police reports that seem more like questions than answers. And it's precisely this silence, this emptiness surrounding the killer that makes him all the more frightening. Think about it. How many unsolved crimes are out there? How many serial killers have never been identified? Have you ever experienced this? That feeling of walking alone at night, looking back, and feeling like someone might be watching you. Now imagine living in a city where, for weeks, months, or even years, bodies mysteriously appeared and no one could understand who was behind it. With each new victim, fear, outrage, and the question that tormented the entire community grew. Could this killer walk among us? Stay with me until the end, because this story shows how reality can be even darker than any thriller. We're faced with an unsolved mystery, an investigation that never found its conclusion, and a serial killer who may have taken his secrets to the grave, or worse, who may have continued to live as an ordinary person, completely unnoticed by society. Over the years, investigators tried to profile this criminal. They searched for patterns, characteristics, a modus operandi that could reveal who was responsible for such violence. But with each clue found, 10 more seemed to emerge to further confuse the situation. It was as if someone was playing a game with the police, always one step ahead, always leaving trails that pointed in every direction, and at the same time, nowhere. This cat-and-mouse game turned the case into a nightmare for detectives and an urban legend for the locals. And that's precisely what makes this story so fascinating. The contrast between the brutality of the crimes and the silence that followed. No faces, no names, no arrests. Only memories of nights of terror and pages of unfinished investigation. It's as if the killer had vanished into thin air, like a shadow dissolving into the darkness. But was that really the case? Was there never a real clue? Or did someone know more than they should have, and this secret was buried along with the victims? What you're about to see is a narrative that blends facts, hypotheses, and the strange feeling that the truth may be closer than we imagine. Prepare to delve into disturbing details, stories that reveal the darkest side of the human mind, and a mystery that decades later still challenges even the greatest criminologists. And this is just the beginning of a case that could change the way you view unsolved crimes. From here on, we'll explore the context, the initial attacks, and the atmosphere of fear that spread throughout the city. Have you ever stopped to think what it would be like to live in a time when everything seemed peaceful, when people believed they were safe, but something dark was happening right next to them? Imagine walking down seemingly quiet streets, lit only by the dim glow of streetlights, where families gathered in front of the television or on the sidewalks to chat, never imagining that, in the shadows, someone watched silently, choosing their next victim. What you'll discover now may surprise you, and perhaps even change the way you view that era. We're talking about a period marked by contrasts. On one hand, the ordinary routine of a city that seemed to live in peace, children playing in the backyard, neighbors who knew each other by name, doors often left open because no one imagined the danger that might be lurking. On the other, an invisible threat that slowly began to spread fear and distrust among residents. It was as if two realities coexisted in the same place, that of normal life and that of hidden terror. The decade in question was seen as a time of change, of modernization in many aspects, but also of social fragility. The police didn't have access to the technology we know today, such as DNA banks or advanced tracking systems. Investigations relied almost exclusively on statements, physical clues, and the memories of witnesses. And it was in this limited environment that a little-known serial killer found the perfect environment to act. Have you ever experienced this? The feeling that something might be wrong, but no one seemed to notice. This was the reality for many families in that city. While some celebrated the arrival of new times, with more job opportunities and lifestyle changes, there was an underlying climate of tension. People still felt safe enough to walk at night or let their children play alone in the yard, but that trust would soon begin to crumble. Every corner, every deserted street, every unfamiliar look could hide the presence of a cold-blooded killer who seemed to move without a trace. It's curious to think how everyday details reveal so much about that period. Imagine local newspapers carrying headlines about politics, sports, or social events, while inside pages discreetly featured small notes about disappearances or strange crimes. At first, few people paid attention, believing them to be isolated incidents. But little by little, the reports accumulated, and the population began to realize that something larger and much more disturbing was happening. Stay with me until the end, because from this point on, the story begins to transform into a true collective nightmare. The most disturbing thing was the feeling of powerlessness. Without modern resources, the police felt limited in the face of an invisible enemy. With each new case, fear grew. With each victim found, the community grew even more withdrawn in distrust. Long-standing friendships became marked by a look of suspicion because no one knew for sure who might be behind the crimes. It was an environment of growing paranoia, where any detail could be interpreted as a sign of danger. And amidst this atmosphere, the killer seemed comfortable, almost as if he belonged there, unnoticed. While the families tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, the truth was that something dark was happening in the shadows. The contrast was stark. Community parties and family gatherings on one side, fear, silence, and bloodshed on the other. This is the setting where it all began. A seemingly ordinary town in a time of transformation, yet one that held terrible secrets. And it is against this backdrop that the figure of a serial killer who was never caught emerges, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and an invisible scar on the collective imagination. From here, we'll enter the first steps of this horror journey, where each detail revealed deepens the mystery. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to open the newspaper in the morning and come across news so disturbing that it would completely change the way you see your own city? A strange, macabre, and seemingly isolated case, but one that hid much more than first appeared. What you're about to discover may surprise you, and perhaps even make you suspicious of how violence can hide behind the normality of everyday life. It all began seemingly discreetly, almost unnoticed. The first victim was found under mysterious circumstances in a location that, until then, had been seen as peaceful and safe. The details shocked investigators. There were signs of violence, marks that betrayed the attacker's coldness, but at the same time, a strange absence of clear clues. There were no witnesses, no logical explanations, and the scene seemed carefully constructed to confuse. The crime scene was an enigma in itself. Have you ever experienced that? That feeling of looking at something that seems simple, but carries a frightening complexity behind it. That's exactly how the police felt when faced with the first body. At the time, no one could have imagined that this would be just the beginning of a series of attacks that would shake the entire community. The first death was treated as an isolated incident, perhaps the result of a botched robbery or even a personal dispute. But as the days progressed, a pattern began to emerge. A dark, cruel, and impossible pattern to ignore. The second case wasn't long in coming, and in it the killer seemed to have become more bold. The victim was left in an even more visible location, almost as if the perpetrator wanted to draw attention to himself, as if daring the police to find him. The most disturbing detail? The macabre signature that repeated itself in both crimes, a detail that investigators didn't immediately reveal to the public, but which confirmed a serial killer was on the loose. Stay with me until the end, because each new murder seemed calculated to generate panic. The third, even more brutal attack showed that the killer was not only choosing his victims carefully, but also escalating the level of violence. It was as if he were fueling a sick game, testing boundaries and observing the impact he was having on the community. Fear spread quickly and no one felt safe anymore. People began to avoid leaving their homes at night. Newspapers carried alarming headlines, and conversations in markets, schools, and churches revolved around the same topic. Who would be next? The climate of terror grew with each new crime, and what once seemed unthinkable became part of everyday life. Entire families began to change their habits, and the feeling that the killer could be anywhere, hiding behind any face, was suffocating, and the bolder the criminal became, the more confusing the investigation became. The clues led nowhere, and the police always seemed to arrive too late. It was as if the killer anticipated every move, reveling in his own impunity. The coldness with which he acted revealed that this was no ordinary crime, but the work of a sick, calculating, and dangerous mind. Someone who had mastered the art of killing and disappearing without leaving a solid trace. But this wouldn't be an isolated case. With each victim, the pattern became clearer, and at the same time more disturbing. What once seemed like a sad episode would soon turn into a macabre series, a string of murders that would put the entire city on alert. And it is precisely at this point that the true story begins to take shape, revealing one of the darkest and most mysterious chapters in criminal history. Have you ever wondered what goes on in the mind of someone capable of killing repeatedly without showing any remorse? As if human life were merely a disposable piece in a macabre game. Serial killers have always aroused fear and fascination, but when we talk about a killer who has never been caught, the mystery becomes even more disturbing. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because we're not just dealing with brutal crimes, but also a psychological puzzle that still intrigues experts and investigators. From the first murders, it was clear to the police that this was no ordinary criminal. There was a pattern, a kind of ritual that repeated itself at each crime scene. The victims, for the most part, fit the same profile, seemingly vulnerable people, often in situations of social vulnerability, which made them easier to approach. The modus operandi left little doubt that everything was meticulously planned. Nothing was done haphazardly. Every detail seemed designed to confuse, to leave the feeling that the killer not only killed, but also enjoyed manipulating those who tried to understand him. Have you ever experienced this? That moment when you look at a situation and realize something repeats itself, but can't quite explain why. That's how investigators felt as they analyzed each case. Small clues emerged. The choice of locations, the way the body was left, certain signs that seemed to serve as a trademark. Some criminology experts believe this behavior revealed not only coldness, but also a desire for absolute control, as if the killer were sending a silent message to society and the police. Forensic psychologists who have analyzed similar cases throughout history often point out that serial killers act driven by a combination of compulsion, trauma, and a profound disregard for human life. However, what was striking in this particular case was the criminal's ability to remain invisible. He seemed like a cunning predator, someone who patiently studied his victims, bided his time, and then disappeared without a trace. Despite so many clues, the killer always seemed one step ahead, as if he knew the limits of the investigation and knew exactly how to avoid capture. Stay with me until the end, because this enigma goes far beyond physical violence. We're talking about a calculating mind, one that possibly fed on the very fear it spread. Some experts suggest the killer sought recognition, but in a twisted way. Rather than appearing publicly, he preferred to be a ghostly presence, commented on in newspapers and discussed in whispers on the streets. Others argue that his motivation was linked to a sick pleasure in domination, in feeling powerful in the face of others' vulnerability. With each analysis, more questions emerged than answers. Was he an ordinary man, living a seemingly normal life with his family and neighbors, hiding his true colors behind a discreet routine? Or was he a wanderer, someone who went unnoticed precisely because he had no fixed ties, making any investigation difficult? The profile drawn was never unanimous, and perhaps this is one of the most disturbing points. Even in the face of so many deaths, no one has ever been able to clearly define the true monster behind the terror. This psychological mystery, coupled with the authorities' inability to reach a conclusion, further fueled the aura of fear surrounding the case. The public was divided between theories. Some believed the killer might be within the community itself, living side by side with his victims, while others were certain he was an outsider who appeared and disappeared like a specter. And it's at this point that the story begins to become even more complex, because understanding this serial killer's profile wasn't just a matter of investigation, but also a race against time. After all, with each new victim, the pattern became clearer, and at the same time, more frightening. What happened next would reveal just how far this twisted mind would go. Have you ever wondered how a serial killer can commit so many crimes, leave a trail of blood and terror in his wake, and still never be identified by the police? How is it possible that even with clues, witnesses, and evidence, a serial killer manages to escape justice as if invisible? What you're about to discover may surprise you, and perhaps even outrage you, because this is not just the story of a ruthless criminal, but also of an investigation marked by mistakes, failures, and obstacles that ultimately allowed him to continue acting freely. From the first murders, police knew they were dealing with something unusual. The pattern repeated itself. The signs were clear, and the public pressed for answers. Investigators were assigned, police stations flooded with calls, and suspects began to emerge. But as the certainty that a serial killer was on the loose grew, so did the frustration. Every clue seemed to lead to a dead end. Have you ever experienced this? That feeling that the solution is right in front of you, but something always slips through your fingers? That's exactly how the authorities felt. One of the biggest problems was the technological limitations of the time. There were no modern DNA analysis systems, nor interconnected national databases. Fingerprints took weeks to match, and often weren't even collected correctly. In some cases, entire crime scenes were compromised by a lack of proper forensics. Curious police officers who tampered with objects, neighbors who entered before the area was cordoned off, reporters who stepped over potential evidence. Each of these mistakes was one less chance to find the killer, but it wasn't just the lack of technology that hampered the investigation. Human error also played a role. Disagreements between departments, ego clashes among investigators, and even negligence at certain moments created fertile ground for the criminal to stay ahead. Some suspects were detained, questioned, and even tried by public opinion, only to be quickly released due to a lack of concrete evidence. This not only fueled public outrage, but also reinforced the real killer's sense of impunity. Stay with me until the end. Because the most disturbing thing is realizing that, at times, the investigation seemed to go in circles. Conflicting reports, ignored testimonies, and shelved clues turned the case into a maze of misconnected information. Some researchers even hypothesized that the serial killer might have had connections within the police force or local politics, which would explain his ease of escape. After all, was he really that lucky? Or did someone just not want him to be discovered? The impact of all this on the community was devastating. People no longer trusted the authorities, believing the investigation was being mishandled or even sabotaged. Each new death was not only a tragedy, but also painful proof that the killer remained untouchable. And with each crime, the serial killer seemed bolder, as if fully aware of the incompetence or fragility of those hunting him. It was a cruel power game, where those who were supposed to protect ended up becoming unwitting accomplices to the failure. Some criminology experts argue that this is one of the most frightening aspects of the case. It wasn't just the killer's cold-bloodedness that ensured his impunity, but also the errors of those who were supposed to stop him. It's as if two stories intertwined, that of the criminal and that of the police themselves, both riddled with flaws, oversights, and contradictions. And the more investigation, the clearer it became that this wasn't just incompetence, but something larger, a web of obstacles that could range from a lack of resources to vested interests. And it was precisely in this climate of frustration, fear, and distrust that the investigation entered a new phase. With each capture attempt, the killer seemed to elude him even more easily, and the mystery surrounding his identity grew. From here, you'll understand how the case became one of the greatest mysteries in criminal history, leaving questions that resonate to this day. Have you ever wondered how a serial killer could escape justice, terrorize an entire city, and even decades later, remain nothing more than a nameless shadow? Unsolved crimes always arouse fascination and fear, but when we talk about a serial killer who was never caught, the mystery becomes even more disturbing. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because this isn't just a story of brutal murders, but also of an enigma that has stood the test of time and still intrigues experts, police officers, and curious people around the world. Even after years of investigations, testimonies, clues, and suspicions, the truth remains buried in silence. To this day, no one has been officially held accountable for the crimes, and this void creates a disturbing feeling. If we can't identify such a cruel killer, how many others might have escaped with impunity? Have you ever experienced this? That feeling of not finding an answer, of being faced with questions that keep echoing, with no apparent solution. That's precisely how this case remains alive in the collective memory. Over the decades, several theories have emerged to explain who might be behind the murders. Some believe the serial killer was someone from within the community, perhaps a respected figure who used his position to remain undetected. Others argue he was an outsider, someone who appeared and disappeared without a trace, like a ghost who could never be identified. There are even darker theories, which raise the possibility that the criminal had protection within the police or political establishment, which would explain how he managed to escape so many times. Criminology experts analyzed the pattern of the crimes and raised psychological hypotheses. Some claim the killer acted out of compulsion and needed to repeat his rituals to feel pleasure or power. Others argue there was a deeper motivation, perhaps linked to trauma or an unhealthy need to defy authority. But despite so much analysis, one thing always recurred: the killer seemed to always be one step ahead. No matter how many clues were uncovered, how many suspects were questioned, in the end, everything dissolved into new doubts. Stay with me until the end, because the most intriguing thing is realizing how, despite so much effort, research has never managed to close this cycle. The mystery not only survived, but grew over time. Each new theory fueled the fascination and fear even more. Books, documentaries, and articles have been written trying to decipher the enigma, but they all end the same way, without a definitive answer. And this leads us to an uncomfortable reflection. This case is a cruel reminder that justice doesn't always reach those who deserve it most. While families mourned their losses and the community lived in a constant state of alert, the killer, whoever he was, never faced the consequences. The lack of justice left not only open wounds but also an invisible scar that remains to this day. What makes this story even more disturbing is the possibility that the serial killer went on with his Life as if nothing had happened. He could have been a neighbor, a co-worker, someone who frequented the same places as his victims. Or perhaps he took all his secrets to the grave, laughing silently at the fact that he was never unmasked. And do you believe this killer could still be alive, living in the shadows, perhaps even close to those investigating his story? Or do you think he's already departed this world, taking with him the answers everyone still seeks? The mystery continues, and from here on, we'll delve even deeper into the theories and questions that remain unanswered to this day. And as we delve into this seemingly endless mystery, it's impossible not to think about how it affects each of us in different ways. Some feel fear, others intrigued, and still others outraged by impunity. And that's precisely why I want to hear from you. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far. It could be a feeling, a theory, or even a memory of another case you know about. Your perspective can further enrich this conversation and open up new perspectives for those following along. And since we're building this journey together, please also leave a like. It seems simple, but this gesture really helps keep this content alive and allows it to reach even more people who are also interested in true crime stories and unsolved mysteries. Each like is a sign that this space is valuable, that it's worth continuing to cover topics like this. And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join this community. By subscribing, you ensure you don't miss any upcoming episodes and directly support the channel's growth. Your participation is what keeps this project going and reaching even further, because, ultimately, we're not just telling dark stories. We're building a space together to reflect, question, and share the impact these cases have on us. And while this mystery remains unsolved, our conversation continues, because there's still so much more to be explored. Imagine someone who killed multiple times, left a trail of terror wherever they went, and to this day has never been found. We're not talking about a name featured in famous documentaries or explored in streaming series, but a nearly forgotten case shrouded in the shadows of criminal history. A little-known serial killer who, in a way, lives on in the imagination of those who dare to investigate the details of his trajectory. There's something disturbing about thinking that mid-century, there are still hidden truths buried in dusty archives, contradictory testimonies, and memories lost to time. This particular case not only defies logic, but also exposes how fragile our perception of security can be. While many believe themselves protected, someone there, hidden in the cracks of normality, planned every step with almost surgical precision. This killer's journey left not only victims, but also a legacy of doubt, investigative failures, and a sense that justice sometimes moves too slowly in the face of human cunning. And perhaps that's precisely what's so impactful, realizing that behind the cold headlines, there were families destroyed, entire communities in shock, ordinary lives forever changed. What you're about to discover may surprise you. Because this isn't just another crime report. It's a true behind-the-scenes journey into an investigation rife with mistakes, successes, discarded hypotheses, and many others that could never be proven. It's also a reflection on the criminal mindset. What drives someone to cross the line between life and society and the dark impulse to repeatedly take lives? Experts say every serial killer carries a signature, a pattern, a need for control or the expression of deep trauma. But in this case, everything seemed even more nebulous, as if each revelation were just a smokescreen hiding something bigger. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding a mystery like this isn't just about listing dates or narrating crimes, but delving into the layers that make up a mind capable of deceiving not only the victims, but also those tasked with capturing them. The historical context of the time already reveals much. Seemingly quiet streets, families going about their daily lives, while in the shadows someone defied all limits. This contrast between normality and chaos is what makes everything even more unsettling. Think about how many decisions could have changed the course of the investigation, how many clues were ignored, and how every misinterpreted detail paved the way for impunity. Some say that part of these killers' genius lies precisely in this, manipulating not only their victims, but also the system itself, transforming themselves into a ghost in the eyes of the law, always one step ahead, always fueling the investigator's sense of helplessness. And when we look back, we realize that the case is not only a police puzzle, but also a reflection of the limitations of an era. Lack of technology, rudimentary analytical methods, unprepared teams, and at times even hidden agendas that seem to prevent the truth from coming to light. What's even more intriguing is that, even with advances in forensic science, criminal psychology, and the reopening of files in later years, the enigma remains intact, as if each new piece fitting together only reveals a greater void, a silence that insists on remaining. And it's in this silence that fear sets in, because it speaks not only to the victims, but to all of us, after all. The feeling that someone like this could simply disappear without a trace awakens insecurities that span generations. This case leads us to reflect on transformation, how a series of crimes can change the mindset of an entire city, alter routines, and shape the behavior of people who never left their homes the same way again. And it's not just about fear, but also about revelations that make us question the extent of human fallibility in the face of the cunning of those who dedicate themselves to living outside the law. There's an implicit invitation here to look beyond the obvious, to question official versions, to understand that the truth isn't always on the surface. As we move forward in this narrative, realize that we are faced with something that is not just a criminal chronicle, but a kind of mirror of society, reflecting our limits and weaknesses. Perhaps that's why so many experts and curious people remain captivated by this mystery, trying to find answers in every detail, as if deciphering this enigma would also decipher something within ourselves. And since we're building this investigation together, I want to propose a simple gesture. Comment below, "I'm on this journey too," because every word you leave here helps transform this space into a true community of people who seek, above all, to understand the deepest layers of these mysteries. To truly understand the enormity of this mystery, we need to go back in time and place ourselves in the context in which it all happened. It's not enough to look at the crimes in isolation, because they only gain weight when we realize the contrast between the seemingly ordinary routine and the darkness that lurked beneath it. Imagine a mid-sized city in the 1970s, where life seemed to follow a predictable rhythm. Quiet streets, children playing late into the night, neighbors who still greeted each other by name and left their doors ajar as a sign of trust. It was a time when the sense of security was still part of the local identity, almost as if that corner of the world were protected from greater dangers lurking elsewhere. But the hidden truth lay precisely in this overconfidence. While families lived peacefully, something dark was happening in the shadows. The contrast between the breezy everyday life and the intentions of a killer on the loose creates a tension that, to this day, chills those who delve into the behind-the-scenes story. There was an air of collective naivete, a mindset that believed evil was distant, confined to large cities or the tabloid pages of newspapers elsewhere. However, it was precisely this state of unpreparedness that paved the way for a quiet town to become the stage for a series of disturbing crimes. With each account, we see how seemingly trivial decisions, like returning home late or trusting strangers, could completely change the course of a person's life. And it's curious to note how these details, seen today, seem so obvious, but at the time they fit perfectly into the norm. Perhaps that's why the first victim went unnoticed, as if it were just an isolated case, a tragic but not alarming event. But as time passed, the signs began to accumulate, and the entire city was forced to face a reality that until then had been beyond their imagination. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what was at stake was not just physical safety, but also the psychological impact of living under the threat of something no one could explain. It was as if every corner held a riddle. Every noise at night was interpreted differently. Every disappearance took on double weight. This transformation in the way people lived and perceived their own territory was a turning point for many people. People who had previously walked the streets freely became suspicious of even the most familiar faces, and entire families were forced to adopt new routines to protect themselves. And here comes a detail that is rarely remembered. The police investigation at the time was limited, lacking the support of modern DNA analysis technologies or integrated databases. This meant that, while fear spread, the killer seemed to roam freely, exploiting the loopholes and slowness of a system still in its infancy. It's not hard to imagine how this lack of institutional preparation ended up further fueling the community's sense of powerlessness. There was an expectation that authorities would provide quick responses, but what we saw were long silences, dismissed hypotheses, and a cycle of growing frustration. This social climate is crucial to understanding why the case gained an almost mythical aura. Because it wasn't just about crimes, but about the loss of collective innocence, about the revelation that no one was as protected as they thought. Every detail of this period serves as a window into something larger, how entire societies can transform in the face of shock, how previously naive mindsets can become suspicious, and how the hidden truth of a single individual can shake the lives of thousands. As the weeks passed, rumors, theories, and unfounded suspicions emerged. People began pointing fingers at each other, and long-standing friendships crumbled amid distrust. The town, once marked by close neighbors, became a land of sidelong glances, locked doors, and closely guarded secrets. This shift in behavior is one of the most powerful legacies left by the mystery, the transformation of an entire community into something unrecognizable, marked by invisible scars that took years to heal, and in many cases, never truly healed. When we consider this contrast, the peaceful setting versus the brutal crimes, it's impossible not to notice how circumstances shaped the narrative. It's not just about what happened, but about what didn't happen because of fear. Parties that ceased to exist, businesses that closed, dreams interrupted. It's at this point that the collective journey of an entire city intertwines with the individual mystery of the killer. And perhaps it's this intersection between ordinary life and the terror in the shadows that keeps this story resonating to this day. And since we're exploring these layers together, I'd like to propose a symbolic detail to mark this reflection. Write in the comments, "This makes sense to me," because each time someone shares their perception, we strengthen this exchange and give new meaning to stories that, even old ones, still have much to reveal. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And to do so, we need to revisit the moment it all began, when the first signs of danger emerged almost imperceptibly. The first documented case seemed, at first glance, isolated, but when we look closely at the details, we realize a pattern few could see at the time. A victim found in a quiet alley, seemingly chosen at random, but with subtle marks that indicated coldness and planning. There were no signs of a disorderly struggle, nothing to suggest impulse. Everything was calculated, almost clinical. The impact of this initial episode was enormous for investigators. Even though the population, going about their daily lives, took time to realize the gravity of the situation. It's amazing to think how small details can carry so much information. Every positioning of the body, every object moved at the crime scene, every choice of time or route reveals the meticulous mind of those behind these acts. And even when faced with evidence that today would be analyzed in minutes, back then, each clue required hours of observation, manual comparisons, and cross-referencing that often led nowhere. The feeling of helplessness was constant, and this increased the pressure on everyone involved. Have you ever experienced this? That frustration of realizing that, no matter how much effort and attention you dedicate, the truth seems to remain just out of reach. What makes this phase of the story even more disturbing is the realization that each subsequent crime became progressively more daring. The killer wasn't just repeating a pattern, he was testing limits, observing how the city reacted, evaluating the flaws in the system. Each new victim bore signs of sickening courage, as if defying investigators were part of the motivation itself. And this escalating behavior isn't just a reflection of cruelty, but also of a mindset that transforms with experience. Someone learning from past mistakes, refining techniques, building a personal journey of control and absolute power over the lives of others. The city, in turn, began to feel the weight of these decisions. Once tranquil, the streets became silent. Every nighttime noise raised suspicions, and the perception of normalcy was gradually replaced by constant surveillance. Families changed their routines, parents began monitoring their children's every move, neighbors began keeping an eye on each other. This transformation, though driven by fear, also left deep marks on the collective psyche, the feeling that terror could be anywhere, lurking, disguised as routine, became part of daily life, and this is where the narrative becomes even more complex. What seemed like an isolated episode turned into a sequence no one could control. Each crime was simultaneously predictable and unexpected. Authorities tried to create profiles, raise suspicions, and cross-reference data, but the killer seemed to anticipate every move, moving in the shadows as if behind the scenes in a game only he knew completely. The feeling of helplessness and insecurity was not only physical, but emotional, affecting not only the direct victims, but the entire surrounding community. And there's something fascinating and at the same time disturbing about this escalation. It's not just about increasing the level of violence, but about understanding how a criminal's audacity reveals layers of his own mind. Each decision, each choice of victim or location is like a piece of a puzzle that only the killer can complete. But to an outside observer, these pieces scatter chaotically, provoking tension, fear, and a constant feeling that something is always about to happen, even when everything seems calm. As the pattern solidified, speculation and psychological analyses, behavioral studies, and theories of motivation emerged. But no matter how hard experts tried to decipher it, the truth remained hidden. And it is precisely this duality, the partial knowledge, the available evidence, and the inability to connect all the dots, that keeps the case so intriguing. Every detail we uncover now only heightens the impact those early crimes had, not only on the victims, but on the entire social fabric of the city. And, in this climate of growing tension, it was impossible not to sense that this was not an isolated incident. The criminal's audacity, the coldness of his actions, and the growing pattern indicated that this was only the beginning of something larger, more complex, and more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The stage was already set, a city in transformation, fear seeping into daily routines, and a killer who seemed to be playing with his own ability to escape consequences. For all these reasons, the narrative of these early crimes isn't just about violence or cruelty. It's about decisions, impact, and transformation, about how an isolated event can trigger profound change in an entire community. It's about peering behind the scenes into a mind that defies law and logic, and realizing that often the most frightening thing isn't the act itself, but what it provokes around it. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding this serial killer's profile is to delve into the inner workings of a mind that seemed to defy logic itself. Investigators at the time studied every detail, every pattern, every victim choice, attempting to create what we now call a criminal profile, an essential tool for anticipating behavior and, ideally, capturing whoever was behind such a meticulously planned series of crimes. They realized that although the appearance of randomness was strong, there was a frightening consistency. The victims shared similar characteristics: age, routine, vulnerability, and the killer's modus operandi indicated not only planning, but an almost ritualistic need for control over the lives of others. Forensic psychologists, reviewing similar cases, often point out that this type of behavior doesn't emerge out of nowhere. It involves a complex combination of factors: unresolved trauma, obsessive tendencies, and a perverse need to assert power. Some experts cite that many little-known serial killers have developed a mindset that blends patience, observation, and cold calculation, something that makes them nearly invisible to those who can't see beyond the obvious. In this case, this analysis becomes even more fascinating because, despite so much evidence, the killer always seemed one step ahead, as if he had anticipated every move the investigators made before they even realized the complete pattern. The impact of this on the investigation was profound. It wasn't just about collecting physical evidence, but about trying to decipher a complex personality, someone capable of manipulating situations, exploiting vulnerabilities, and disappearing without a trace. It was as if we were confronted with a hidden truth, a mentality that unfolded alongside the city's normal life, invisible to everyone except those seeking to reconstruct the logic behind the crimes. Each psychological analysis revealed new layers, and the more we studied the criminal's behavior, the more evident it became that he was operating within a comfort zone, feeding on the fear, confusion, and frustration of others. Modern criminology experts point out that one of the most common elements in such cases is the progression of behavior. Serial killers rarely remain static. They learn from each action, refine techniques, and adjust their decisions. In the case we are exploring, each subsequent crime was not simply a repetition of the previous one. It was an evolution, an escalation that indicated experience, planning, and possibly pleasure derived from the absolute control exerted over situations. This progression creates a constant tension, because each new event reinforces the feeling that no one is safe, that human logic is insufficient to predict or contain the movements of someone who thinks outside the conventional boundaries. Another point worth highlighting is how investigators attempted to use already known psychological patterns to establish connections and anticipate the next move. Combining modus operandi with behavioral analysis, they raised hypotheses about the killer's age, education, possible family history, and even personality traits. Some studies suggested he possessed keen observational skills, patience in planning, and self-control that allowed him to act almost invisibly. This profile construction, however, always ran up against the technical limitations of the time and information gaps deliberately created by the criminal himself. The complexity of the case also sparked reflections on the nature of evil and how individual decisions can transform entire lives. Each choice the killer made, from selecting a victim to the manner in which he carried out the crime, impacted not only the victim but the entire community, altering perceptions, routines, and behaviors. Human behavior experts say that understanding these decisions is not just a matter of morbid curiosity, but an essential tool for preventing similar events in the future. Highlighting the importance of behavioral studies, prevention, and risk analysis in society, what makes this enigma even more intriguing is that, despite so much effort, evidence, and analysis, the killer's true identity and motives remain unknown. Each partial conclusion raises new questions, and each unconfirmed clue keeps the mystery alive. It's almost as if we're watching behind the scenes of a complex mind, seeing only fragments of a story that refuses to be fully revealed. This sense that something larger is hidden, that the full truth has not yet come to light, is what gives the case its intensity and depth, making each study, each theory, and each psychological analysis truly relevant. The realization that the killer was always operating ahead reinforces an important lesson about observation, patience, and strategy, not just in criminology, but in life in general. Every move, every decision, and every reaction can create consequences that extend far beyond the moment, shaping a trajectory with profound impact. And it is precisely this complexity that fascinates us, because it shows us that, even in a world where we seek logic and answers, some truths remain hidden, waiting to be discovered, interpreted, and understood. This is where profiling connects with something bigger, not just the capture of a criminal, but the understanding of how choices, mindsets, and behaviors can transform the course of events, shape the life of a community, and leave invisible marks that endure over time. Revelations about behavioral patterns, calculated decisions, and psychological clues are not just pieces of a criminal puzzle. They are also reflections of the impact that human complexity can have on the reality around us. Right there. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the investigation of this case means delving into a complex mix of human effort, technological limitations, and decisions that often shape the course of history in unexpected ways. From the outset, the police faced a monumental challenge, tracking down a criminal who not only acted coldly, but also seemed to anticipate every move. The investigations involved endless hours of crime scene analysis, interrogations, and cross-referencing, but there was always something missing, a crucial piece that never appeared. The impact of this void was reflected in every decision made or not made by the investigative team. At the time, available technology was limited, and many modern forensic analysis tools simply didn't exist. DNA collection was rudimentary or non-existent, criminal records weren't integrated, and information that could now be easily compared relied on manual records, prone to errors and oversights. This meant that as the killer continued his trajectory, the police faced obstacles that went beyond the simple challenge of catching a criminal. It was a battle against time, against the unknown, and often against their own institutional limitations. Among the prime suspects, names emerged that seemed to fit parts of the profile drawn by investigators. But each suspicion, no matter how convincing, ended up generating even more questions than answers. Some clues were contradictory. Witnesses gave conflicting accounts, and in certain cases, rumors and hearsay intermingled with facts, turning the investigation into a veritable web of complexity. This difficulty in separating reality from speculation increased tension and frustration, not only among the police but also in the community, which was beginning to realize that perhaps no one was truly in control of the situation. Another factor that further complicated the investigation was the possibility of internal failures or even hidden agendas. In some cases, details suggest that administrative errors, negligence, or even corruption may have influenced the investigation. Did he escape by pure luck, or because someone didn't want him discovered? This question adds a layer of suspense and outrage to the story, reinforcing the feeling that the killer was playing a much bigger game than he seemed. A game in which every obstacle overcome turned into a strategic advantage. With each new crime, investigators tried to adjust their approaches, re-evaluate evidence, and look for patterns that might ultimately lead to capture. But as they studied the criminal's behavior, it became clear that he was learning from his own actions. Every mistake the investigators made was noted and used to hone their techniques, making him even more difficult to track. The police's journey was not just a race against the killer, but a race against the system itself, which showed clear limitations in dealing with such meticulously planned behavior. Looking behind the scenes of these investigations, one also realizes how human decisions profoundly impacted the perception of justice. Every suspect dismissed, every witness not interviewed, or every clue misinterpreted contributed to the killer's freedom, even when it seemed the truth was about to emerge. This alternation between forward and backward, between hope and frustration, creates a narrative of growing tension that shows us not only the criminal's cunning, but also the vulnerability of the structures that should protect and serve. And there's another fascinating point, the psychological effect this entire sequence of mistakes and obstacles had on the investigators. Many of them carried for years the frustration of not being able to solve the case, the feeling of helplessness in the face of incomplete evidence, the constant doubt as to whether something bigger was being hidden. The pressure, the social pressure, and the emotional impact of dealing with a criminal who seemed to always escape, day after day, night after night, transformed the police routine into a true test of mental endurance. Despite all the accumulated experience, subsequent analysis shows that many decisions could have been made differently. Small details overlooked, misinterpreted communications, simplified procedures that would now be considered essential, all contributed to what seemed like a never-ending dance between pursuer and pursued. It's a powerful reminder of how criminal investigation depends not only on skill, but also on resources, coordination, and above all, luck, which often seems to lurk in the most unexpected corners. This combination of factors, technical limitations, human obstacles, and the criminal's strategic skill created a scenario where the mystery not only remained alive, but also gained depth. Each partial revelation, each analysis brought forth, only reinforced the feeling that we were dealing with something larger than meets the eye, something that went beyond the isolated crime, penetrating the social, emotional, and institutional structures of an entire city. And it is this complexity that makes studying this investigation fascinating, because it reveals that the impact of a serial killer is measured not only by the victims, but also by the transformation of the entire community, by the failures and decisions that marked the path of those trying to stop him. As we reflect on these behind-the-scenes details, it becomes clear that the investigation was more than a simple police effort. It was a journey that revealed the system's frailties, the depth of the human mind, and how small decisions can change the course of a story forever. And it is precisely this intersection of action, failure, and learning that makes us realize that, despite all the resources and efforts, the mystery remains, maintaining the aura of enigma that haunts it to this day. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because, even decades later, the case remains shrouded in enigmas that defy the understanding and perception of those who attempt to analyze it. What makes this story so fascinating is not just the brutality of the crimes or the cold-bloodedness of the killer, but the lasting impact it left, and how, to this day, the full truth remains hidden. It's as if, around every corner, in every ancient record, there are invisible clues, fragments of a reality that no one has been able to fully reconstruct. And it is precisely this hidden truth that keeps the story alive in the collective memory, generating debates, speculations, and theories that multiply over time. Experts in criminology and forensic psychology continue to study the case, revisiting the details through modern lenses, trying to understand patterns and motivations that at the time eluded any in-depth analysis. Some theories suggest that the killer may have moved to another city, perhaps even another country, adapting his mindset and methods to new realities, always with the ability to remain invisible. Other hypotheses explore the idea that he could already be dead, taking with him all the secrets no one has been able to uncover, leaving only fragmented traces for posterity. Still others believe in a network of complicity or systematic failures that, deliberately or not, prevented justice from being served. This multiplicity of possibilities fuels the fascination and the feeling that we are faced with a puzzle that refuses to be solved. The psychological impact of this mystery is profound. For the victims' families, the investigators at the time, and the entire community that still harbors memories of those dark days, the feeling of injustice lingers. This mystery reminds us that justice doesn't always reach those who deserve it most, and that decisions, mistakes, or circumstances beyond our control can completely alter the course of our lives. The transformation that fear and uncertainty have wrought in the city reflects how extreme events can shape mindsets and behaviors, creating a shadow that lingers long after the concrete facts have become history. And it is this emotional connection that allows us to grasp the true scale of what occurred. The case is not just a series of crimes. It is a journey of collective impact, exposing human vulnerabilities, ethical dilemmas, and decisions that shape the fate of many people. The city has changed, routines have adjusted, and the perception of safety that once seemed assured has given way to a more cautious, more vigilant awareness, as if every citizen carries within them the reminder that danger can lurk in the shadows. Over the years, the behind-the-scenes nature of this investigation has become fertile ground for analysis. Books, documentaries, and academic discussions. Recent revelations about serial killer behavioral patterns, criminals' strategic decisions, and historical investigative errors have helped shed light on what happened. But they still don't provide definitive answers. Each theory raised, each hypothesis presented, expands the complexity of the case, showing that the full truth may be even more intriguing than we imagine. The feeling that there is always more to discover, that something important is hidden, creates a constant fascination, capable of captivating attention and stimulating reflection on how human decisions, luck, and hidden factors interact in a complex web of consequences. And even with all the study, analysis, and expert effort, the mystery remains. The killer remains invisible, as if his very ability to disappear were part of a larger plan, a journey that defies conventional understanding. The partial evidence, the fragmented accounts, the patterns observed only in retrospect, all reinforce the sense that we are facing something greater than just a sequence of crimes, an enigma that touches on the essence of the human mind, society, and justice. As we reflect on this, it's impossible not to feel the curiosity and unease these stories evoke. The sense that there's something to discover, the tension of imagining possibilities, and the realization that individual decisions by a killer, investigators, or society itself can shape the fate of many, all create a narrative rich in emotion, suspense, and learning. It's a true lesson in the complexity of human relationships and the profound impact that extreme actions can have, lasting through time and remaining in the collective memory. And as we continue to analyze this story, the question that remains, echoing among all the speculation, theories, and reflections, is disturbing and inevitable. And do you believe this serial killer could still be alive, or that he's already taken his secrets to the grave? Comment there. That makes sense to me, and if you've made it this far, thank you for delving with me into this intense and mysterious story. It's incredible to be able to share these details, these analyses, and reflections on a case that defies comprehension to this day, and to feel like there's someone on the other side following every step of this journey. If this content brought you something new, a new perspective, or even a shiver of curiosity, how about letting me know in the comments that you made it to the end? It could be something simple like, "I'm with you until the end," or "This message was for me," just so I know this conversation truly resonated with you. And while you're leaving your mark here in the comments, please also click the like button. It's a small gesture, but it shows that we're connected in this search for real stories, for understanding human behavior, for the behind-the-scenes details of cases that challenge us to think and reflect. Each like helps strengthen this space for exchange and investigation, where we can explore together these journeys, these decisions, and the impacts that shape lives, even when justice seems distant. And if you're still curious, There's a video right here that provides incredible insights into this topic. Click through and stay with me, because there's still so much to discover, analyze, and be amazed by the details that escape you at first glance. It's in this continuity that the story truly comes to life, and I want you to be part of this complete experience.